To use another Margaret Thatcher quotation, she once said, "There is no alternative," that is to, the GDP economy. And what we'd like to provide in this presentation is a worked example of something that is outside of the GDP economy and successful. So it's about Curious Grace, which was an initiative that our office set up earlier this year. So I'm going to speak about some of the theory, and my colleague Cailey from the Justice and Peace Office will take over and take you through the second half. So we're going to try to take some of these high-level concepts and bring it down to earth. So Curious Grace is a mental health drop-in centre that our office helped establish in a parish in the Archdiocese earlier this year. Cailey will show you what it looks like and how it works. Now you may be wondering, what does mental health have to do with ecology? One of the lessons Laudato Si taught us is the integral nature of environmental concerns and human concerns, or to use the expression that comes out of the encyclical, the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. Most commentary on the cry of the poor aspect of Laudato Si has dwelt on the flow and effect of environmental harm to people and communities. Drought causes poverty to farmers. Mining causes loss of access to clean drinking water. Extreme weather causes homelessness. In the case of mental health, the link is more subtle. Pope Francis in Laudato Si speaks of a throwaway culture, his term for an economy of exclusion, in which people on the margins of society are treated as disposable. In this sense, an attitude that begins with consumption of manufactured goods ends up being applied to human beings. People who are not economically useful are left on the scrap heap, and that is where mental health comes in. The Catholic Church is becoming increasingly cognizant of mental health as an issue of social justice. At the beginning of the year, the Vatican itself hosted a first ever conference on mental health. At this conference, Bishop Dolan, who was just mentioned, from the US Diocese of Phoenix, noted that there is a real shortage of mental health professionals across the globe. For this reason, he said, it's very important that the Church attempt to step into the gap and provide assistance to individuals who would otherwise receive none. He stressed, however, that the Church's role in these cases cannot be to diagnose, prescribe or treat, work that must be left to professionals. Instead, he said, the Church must accompany those with mental health problems and their family members. The Australian Catholic bishops were on to this earlier in 2020 with their social justice statement, To Live Life to the Full, dedicated to the issue of mental health. Writing 4 years ago, the bishops commented that there is a missing middle, a severe lack of specialist community mental health services and after-hours care. Gaps between primary health care and acute care mean that people are falling through the system. They are the ones whose mental ill health is too complex for general practitioners and yet not severe enough to access limited specialist support. So literature on well-being or post-growth or steady-state economics presents an alternative to the dominant economic model. It reminds us that so much of what actually counts in life is not measurable economically, and the peril humankind faces of devaluing or even destroying goods that aren't measured and perhaps can't be measured. There are at least two pitfalls that the Church has to steer clear of, however. So first is, the biggest pitfall is that the growth paradigm is so prevalent, not just in the for-profit sector, but in the government and the not-for-profit sector as well. So some organisations that are set up to tackle problems like mental health are simply too big to do so effectively. And we heard this morning some of those stories of, the services are there, but it's just they're so impenetrable. In a review of the literature on post-growth, Jennifer Hinton distilled 5 characteristics of post-growth enterprises. And one that came up was, of course, that post-growth companies remain small, local, and do not want or need to grow. Again, this is perhaps easier to relate to in the context of an enterprise, but it's maybe counterintuitive in the not-for-profit sector. How can it be a bad thing for healthcare to scale up? It turns out that it can be. Dr. Robbie Lloyd, one of our former colleagues at the Justice and Peace Office, is very passionate about this. Robbie argued late last year that regulatory reporting and compliance consumes 30 to 40% of care organisations' time, resources and humanity, diverting them away from face-to-face relational care. The issue again is the ideology of limitless growth. Lorenzo Fioramonti, who literally wrote the book on the Wellbeing Economy, was onto this, and he said, we need to understand development as something totally different. Development is care. It's through a caring relationship with our natural wealth that we can create value, not through its destruction. It's thanks to a cooperative human-to-human interaction that we can achieve the ultimate objective of development, that is, well-being. All this points to the benefits of community-level care that somehow avoids bureaucratisation. The second pitfall of wellbeing economics is that it can draw in too much of an individualistic ethos and measure individual notions of well-being, as Peter just mentioned. And we're going to spend some time unpacking this in the session after lunch. We saw an example of this in recent weeks. Some of you may have seen there was the release of one so-called wellbeing report that said that the places with the greatest wellbeing were all of the North Shore LGAs in Sydney. And the main reason being that they had high rates of home ownership. The question we should be asking and measuring is whether there is wellbeing at a community level. How is wellbeing across our city as a whole? Okay, next slide. Up until now, I've only been drawing on the encyclical Laudato Si. However, the principle of keeping it local, of course, also comes from an older principle of Catholic social thought, which is subsidiarity. The principle of subsidiarity emphasises the need for balance between authority and responsibility. And it's better to care in place than in distant institutions. The Church valorises subsidiarity, but we live in a world where centripetal forces are strong and becoming stronger, as digital platforms and tools work the other way, making it easier to exert ever closer oversight of a distributed workforce. It's very countercultural to keep something local, but it is necessary if we're to be freed from our own systems. A further reason is that community economic practices attempt to meet local needs by delivering increased well-being directly rather than relying on the circuitous route of capitalist industrialisation. As well as being preferable in their own right, local care initiatives are a practical way of escaping dependence on distant suppliers and the ecological impact that comes with that. So that's my intro based on theory, but Cailey's going to tell you what that looks like on the ground. So over to you, Cailey.
My name is Cailey Sharp, and as Michael said earlier, I'm also a social justice facilitator for the Justice and Peace Office. I also study at the University of Technology, Sydney, and I am less than 2 weeks away from completing my psychology thesis, focusing on psychology of online consumerism. So my journey into mental health advocacy began as an intern myself back in 2022. And during my internship, I was involved in planning and co-hosting a series of mental health workshops called Redefining Normal. The idea behind these workshops was to challenge public's perception of mental health and explore the ways that mental health care can be delivered in our local communities. So with that, I would like to talk to you about a program that the Justice and Peace Office launched on the 3rd of March called Curious Grace. Curious Grace is a drop-in centre model that celebrates lived experience and encourages companionship, conversation and creativity. Picture this, a bustling community hub nestled in the heart of a neighbourhood in your local parish where neighbours can walk in freely and find a welcoming space dedicated to nurturing their mental health and their well-being. This is the key concept behind Curious Grace, a place of belonging, good company and accessible support. So Curious Grace began as a small cafe operating in Mildura, run by Jackie, Julie Rankin and Taya Philp, who you can see on the screen beside me. And as Michael said, our former colleague, Dr. Robbie Lloyd, was very passionate about mental health, and he came across Jackie and her group on LinkedIn. He reached out and the conversation began from there. The origin of the Curious Grace Cafe in Mildura was a space to be created by those who entered, a place run by the local community for the local community in the local community. Curious Grace exemplifies Fiora Monti's idea of care, not care in the public policy sense, but care in the everyday sense of the word, individuals in a community caring for one another. Jackie and her team adapted to the problems of the community around them, acknowledging that the issues at hand while honouring the strengths of those who entered. For instance, a drop-in centre located in a low socioeconomic area that targets community isolation. Over time, more community members became involved and contributed to what they could to help this initiative truly flourish. A pop-up library was filled with donated books, Old computers were brought and fixed up to create a computer lab for anyone to use whenever they needed to. A piano was refurbished and sing-alongs began every Wednesday. This cafe in Mildura became this growing hub of vibrant energy. The need for accessible community-based support that improves community wellbeing is paramount, and the statistics, as we all know, paint a very stark reality. In any given year, 1 in 5 Australians experience poor mental health, yet less than half are actually receiving treatment and support. Bishop John Dolan from the US Diocese of Phoenix noted at the 2024 Mental Health Conference that there is a real shortage of mental health professionals across the globe. And as Michael noted earlier, it is very important that the Church steps in to improve this gap and provide assistance to individuals who could otherwise receive none. Now, coming from a soon-to-be psychologist, I'm unfortunately not here to critique the system as much as I want to, but I do know through the work that I have done and continue to do that there definitely are flaws with the traditional model of mental health care. For instance, long wait lists, financial strains, and sometimes fails to meet the needs of those most vulnerable in our communities. So that's where Curious Grace can step in. A proactive approach that brings mental health support directly to the grassroots levels. And unlike most healthcare settings, Curious Grace is designed to be accessible to all and adaptable to the needs of whichever community it is there to serve. Again, our role in instances such as Curious Grace is not to diagnose, prescribe or treat, but to accompany those with mental health problems. One of the most powerful aspects of Curious Grace is the opportunity for peer support, companionship and the essential human connection. The Curious Grace Collective consists of a team of skilled individuals, including those with lived experience of mental illness, conflict mediators, local counsellors, and also a First Nation representative, as well as the founders of the Curious Grace Cafe, Jackie, Julie and Taya. Individuals with lived experience of mental illness provide this invaluable empathy, understanding and the patience to navigate through similar challenges. This shared experience fosters a profound sense of belonging, empowerment and creating a supportive community where individuals can learn from each other's journeys and offer a dignified healthcare approach. The Curious Grace Collective uses its unique skills and experience to then provide training to volunteers. So this includes skills in creating a sense of social inclusion, active listening, invisible case management, and using creative outlets to improve one's mental well-being. So again, it's not our job to prescribe or diagnose, but to be listening, patient companions. Staffed by a dedicated team of trained parishioners turned qualified volunteers, St. Canice's opens its doors once a month to parishioners, neighbours or anyone who happens to be walking by and welcomes them into the Curious Grace space. Whether they're engaging in the buzzing hub of peer-led activities from knitting clubs to friendly games of chess or even enjoying a free meal and a hot cup of coffee, everyone is welcome in the Curious Grace space. By embedding mental health support within the fabric of our local communities, Curious Grace drop-in centres normalise the conversations that surround mental health while also challenging the accessibility issues that may come with traditional support. Curious Grace is a movement set to transform the way that mental health care can be delivered in our local communities. And the true beauty and success behind Curious Grace is that it is adaptable to the needs of each community and each parish. St. Canice has tapped into its own resources and rich skill set to offer a range of activities tailored to their locals. This can be done through a trial and error approach, adapting as you move week by week or month by month. As you can see on the screen, a really simple yet surprising popular activity was a one-on-one hand massage. So Tony Baker, who you can see there on the right, used to go into female corrective facilities in Queensland, and she would offer workshops to teach female inmates on self-care and hygiene practices. So this meant that Tony went in and hosted classes for groups of 15 at a time on how to apply hair and face masks or even hand and foot massages. It offered this way to de-stress in a place that can be lonely and quite frightening. Each person in that room with Tony was in prison for a different reason, some perhaps more extreme than others, but that didn't matter. The common thread was using your skill and creating this active conversation, companionship, and showing deep compassion for another human being. Tony then adapted her skills to be suitable for the guests of St. Canice's, and friends and strangers sit opposite Tony, some even homeless. Their hands were washed, cleansed, and massaged. But in that process, the two conversed on anything that came to mind. For some, this meant opening up about a recent loss, and for others, this meant delving into work-related stress. Either way, they listened to each other and respected their story and journey. Some guests even compared it to the act of Jesus washing the apostles' feet, which I think is a perfect way to sum it up. The area that surrounds St. Canice's Parish also has a dense ageing population. So the volunteering team at St. Canice's made sure to include an activity that would be interesting to this group of people. So we can see lovely Ida on the screen next to me. During the training, I would speak briefly about relationships between the young and the elderly and how they can be quite compelling and beautiful, reflecting on her own relationship with her great auntie and how Ida's auntie then used to host a knitting circle back in the UK. Ida decided to bring this to St. Canice's and offer a workshop that she calls Knit and Natter, which I think is really cute. Within the drop-in centre space, Ida set up a table with bundles of yarn, crochet kits, and even the opportunity to craft little stockings for orphan joeys that you can donate to organisations that foster and rehabilitate orphaned and injured wildlife. At the launch of Curious Grace, we had a group of elderly women who popped over following the 10 a.m. Mass. They all sat down and said things like, "I haven't done this since primary school." But as they started knitting, it all came back to them, and it was like watching a group of little schoolgirls again. Curious Grace can be as simple as just having a chat with a stranger over a cup of tea or coffee. The space can be small and the activity menu can be simple, but all is required is a space with the potential to be adaptable and a team of locals with the heart and an open mind to make a difference. Thank you.